Welcome to the 6th Annual Norman E. Borlaug Lecture. I'm Don Bites in the Department of Animal Science and Biochemistry, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our special evening. We have a very special presentation for you, but before we get into that, I'd like to introduce, first of all, one very special person, and that's Ambassador Kenneth Quinn. He is president of the World Food Foundation. Let's all welcome Ambassador Quinn. Unfortunately, for whom the lecture is named, Dr. Norman E. Borlaug. Norman was not able to come tonight. He is becoming weaker, and so because of health, he was unable to come after a full day in Des Moines today, and he was very sorry that he couldn't be here, and he wanted to extend greetings to all of you. All of you should know that tomorrow is Norman E. Borlaug Day. Well, actually, Norman E. Borlaug World Food Prize Day. And that's also true in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota and Iowa both claim Norman E. Borlaug. The rest of the country, it's called the World Food Day without the name. And I'm told that tomorrow is also worldwide, this is worldwide, UN World Food Day. So tomorrow is a very special day related to food. Norman E. Borlaug World Food Day was named by our Iowa legislature, and the only other day in Iowa named by the legislature was the Herbert Hoover Day. And who knows what day of the year that's on? I'm not sure. Doesn't matter tonight. So anyway, tonight we have a very special guest for you, and the president of Iowa State University, Gregory Joffre, will introduce our speaker, who has been president at Iowa State. He's in his 7th year. So please welcome President Joffre to the podium, please.
Thanks, Don. And Pat, I think we're going to need the microphone turned up a little bit if you have a way to control the volume. Okay, you're all right? Good. Well, I want to also welcome everyone to tonight's lecture. This is a very special event for us every year, and tonight is truly special. We are honored to host this evening Dr. Monty Jones as tonight's Norman Borlaug lecturer. As Dr. Bites indicated, this is part of the World Food Prize Week. This lecture tonight is part of a series of events and activities that are taking place around Iowa and in Des Moines all week. Tomorrow, the celebration of World Food Day and Norman E. Borlaug Day. And the events tomorrow include the first Iowa Hunger Summit in Des Moines, a day of hunger awareness events highlighted by a keynote address by David Beckman, president of the Alliance to End Hunger, the presentation of the World Food Prize on Thursday at the Iowa Capitol to the 2007 World Food Prize laureate, Dr. Philip E. Nelson, a leader of modern food science and technology. And on Thursday and Friday of this week, the World Food Prize Norman E. Borlaug International Symposium that's focusing on biofuels and biofoods. Our guest lecturer tonight, Dr. Monty Jones, has provided a tremendous scientific and humanitarian leadership to our world in the fight against poverty and hunger. Dr. Jones serves as Executive Secretary of the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa, a position that he's held for the last 5 years. He began his career with the West Africa Rice Development Agency, and as head of its upland rice breeding program, he developed a new rice for Africa that was specifically bred for ecological and agricultural conditions in Africa. And he then worked to distribute it to African villages and is credited with substantially increasing the rice harvest and substantially reducing Africa's need to import rice. This work and his continuing efforts in Africa led to his being honored with the 2004 World Food Prize. And along the way, many other awards and recognitions, including being named one of Times Magazine's 100 People Who Shape Our World in 2007. Dr. Jones was born and educated in Sierra Leone. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Sierra Leone, and then his master's and PhDs in plant pathology from Birmingham University in the United Kingdom. And then in 2005, he received an honorary doctorate of science from Birmingham. We are truly pleased and honored to welcome Dr. Jones as the 2007 Norman Borlaug Lecturer at Iowa State University. Please join me in welcoming the 2004 World Food Prize laureate, Dr. Monty Jones.
President Greg Joffrey, Ambassador Kenneth Quinn, ladies and gentlemen, actually it is a pleasure and an honor for me to be here today to give the 6th Norman Borlaug lecture. And I must start this lecture by saying that we've all been inspired by Norman Borlaug. He's done quite a lot for the world, in the area of agriculture and agricultural development. And I personally believe that he steered the Green Revolution in Asia and in Latin America. And we in Africa believe that he will help to shape the Green Revolution also in Africa. So it is with great pleasure and honor that I give this lecture in honor of Norman E. Borlaug. The topic that I have chosen to discuss this evening is one that is related to Africa. I am an African from Africa, and I thought that it would be good to tell you what is happening in Africa in the area of agricultural research and food security. So my title is Agricultural Research and Food Security in Africa. And I would like to start off by saying that agriculture is an important sector that is contributing to the economies of several countries in Africa, particularly those in sub-Saharan Africa. And today, agriculture contributes 1/3 of the total GDP in Africa, and at the same time it employs something like 70% of the workforce in the continent. So you see, it's a very important sector, a sector in which as high as 70% of the population, and we're talking of a population of 800 million people that lives in the rural area, and their livelihood and food security through agricultural activities. Agriculture opens up a range of opportunities. For example, if you look at the continent, which is the second largest in the world, it has got very huge land mass. Agricultural land provides the necessary conditions for farming, and at the same time, it provides environmental services. It's a country that is growing at a very fast rate. At 3%, we have the highest population growth compared to other regions of the world. And of course, increasing population means increasing demand for food, and we can get that food through agricultural activities. Again, in Africa, there is increasing awareness of the potential of improved technologies in terms of boosting agricultural production and eventually agricultural productivity. If you take a look at the world, look at the global picture, you find out that agriculture is growing at a rate of 2% globally, and population is growing at the rate of 1.6%. And basically what that means is that worldwide, we can produce enough food for the people that live in this world. And I think that the global picture that we see in today in terms of increased rate of food production is due to the increased productivity that we're getting in some developing regions, like in Asia and Latin America. But if you look at the picture in Africa, you find the reverse, that our cereal crops, for example, the yields have remained stagnant at very low level over several decades now. Agricultural productivity is either declining or has remained stagnant, over several decades as well. And here, our population growth rate is at something like 3%. Agricultural growth rate is at 2.5%. And so, in Africa, we cannot produce enough food to feed our people. And that is the difference and the picture of what is happening in Africa and what is happening globally and what is happening in the developed world. But in the last few years, we're beginning to see a turnaround of this declining or stagnated agricultural trends in Africa. And I think agricultural productivity has started climbing up. However, we feel that the situation is not very constant in Africa on grounds that there is marked variability in terms of agricultural productivity, from one country to another. Quite a number of countries that are listed here, like Nigeria, Mozambique, and South Africa, has recorded steady growth over a protracted period of time. But if we take a look at what is happening in the continent today, why do we have this long period of stagnated productivity? And I believe that one of the major problems that we encounter is the fact that our production systems are very diverse and very dynamic. The majority of our farmers are cultivating their crops in rain-fed systems, so we are rain-fed dependent. And compared to Asia, where the system is mainly irrigated system, the crop is mainly rice. In Africa, we have 12 staples, more than 12 staples. And so sometimes it's a bit difficult to target technology to specific environment. But having said that, rain-fed system depends on rainfall for agricultural activities. If it doesn't rain for a protracted period, you run into problems of drought, for example. And then we have poor infrastructure, feeder roads to the farm gate that will take the inputs, external inputs like fertilizers to the farm gates are very poor. We do not have developed markets. Our markets are small and fragmentary. And on top of that, we have inconsistent policy that do not favor the agricultural sector in some cases, and of course, low investment in agriculture and agricultural research. These are some of the problems that have plagued the continent for a protracted period. And so if we look at the statistics, they are really very deplorable statistics, one that we would like to turn around, as soon as possible. In the continent, for example, 4 out of every 10 Africans survive with less than $1 a day. 1/3 of our people are not malnourished. And 32 of 48 least developed countries are in sub-Saharan Africa. And 1/3 of our children under 5 are stunted, of course, due to inadequate feeding and poor health. Like I said, these are very deplorable statistics that we would like to turn around. But investment in agricultural research, I believe, has been a very good thing for Africa. I think over the years, we have come up with credible technologies, important technologies. Some of these technologies have earned Africa the World Food Prize. Kenneth Quinn is here to testify to that. And just to mention a few of these technologies, Africa has come up with high-quality protein maize varieties, striga-resistant maize varieties, improved high-yielding maize varieties that are giving yields that are much, much higher than previously grown varieties. We've come up with cassava materials that are resistant to the major cassava diseases, cassava mosaic, for example. And these materials are being grown in a number of countries, and we've seen an increase in yield of up to something like 40%, even under traditional cultivation system. And we're talking of a system where there is very little or no use of external inputs like fertilizers. And then we've come up with the Nerika rice. Nerika rice are high-yielding varieties, and these are being grown not only in West Central Africa, where they were originally tested, but today they've been grown right across the continent. And we've come up with promising beans material, banana material, just to mention a few. And I would like to show you some pictures of what I'm talking about. The tissue culture banana that we developed in more than double the yields of previously grown, sorry, I don't have a pointer here, of previously grown banana materials. That's right. And if we go further and look at the Nerika rice that we developed, first of all, Nerika stems out of an interspecific hybridization between the Asian indigenous rice species and the African indigenous rice species. The Asian indigenous rice species have got high yield potential because on their panicle, which is the one this way, they have up to about 250 grains, much higher than the African indigenous rice species, where the panicle can hold only something like 100 to 150 grains. So the Asian have got high yield potential, compared to the African type. So basically, what we did was to combine the high yield potential of the Asian rice with the sturdiness and the ability to suppress weeds, generally the adaptation of the African rice into new improved varieties that we call New Rice for Africa. And we succeeded in doing that because if you take a look at the panicle in the middle there, it's from a Nerika plant with 400 grains per panicle. And so we got what we call transgressive segregation there. And transgressive segregation, of course, is where the offspring does better than the best of the parents. 400 grains compared to 250 grains. And the plants respond to external inputs, to fertilizer application. You give the appropriate level of inputs, you get much higher yields. But at the same time, this is coupled with some important traits of the African type. Ability to suppress weeds through rapid vegetative growth and droopy lower leaves, particularly during the vegetative phase. It also combines traits like higher level of resistance or tolerance to some of the major stresses that we encounter in the region. And on top of that, we have higher protein content in the Nerika rice. And so you can see the difference that such a rice could make in the lives of the African people. Even under traditional cultivation systems, it can give yields of up to something like 25-50% better than the previously grown traditional varieties. A number of countries in Africa have picked up cotton production, BT cotton. And today, countries like Burkina Faso, Benin, Mali, are making minimum of 100 million annually through sale of this cotton, through increased production of BD cotton. So if you take a look at that level, Africa is making some progress. They've come up with credible technologies. Credible technologies are doing well in isolated areas. Probably basically what we need to do is to try to see how we can translate this into continent-wide impact, so that we realize increased agricultural production and increased agricultural productivity. In the area of natural resource management, we need to come up with credible technologies as well that will complement what we're doing in the area of varietal improvement. Integrated natural resource management, we need to address issues related to soil degradation. We need to address issues related to deforestation, issues related to drought, etc. And we need to come up with appropriate integrated pest management practices. And we need to empower the end users, particularly the farmers. Farmers, end users, NGO groups, etc., must have a say in the research that we conduct, because eventually they are the people that will adopt the technologies that you're developing. And if they don't have the say, usually your technology will remain in the shelf, and we want these technologies to get out to the field. And I personally believe that farmers' research is very important. Sometimes we say the farmers cannot conduct research, but they do conduct research of their own. And this is a good example of a research that was conducted by farmers, in which in the Sahel zone, the dry zone in Africa, the farmers decided to create pits well before the rainy season. Rainy season is usually, rainfall is usually erratic in this part of the continent. And it's not usually adequate to grow a crop of rice. But they dug this pit and they filled this pit up with manure, organic manure. And then in the rainy season, with the first rains, this pit became nutrient-laden, I would say, and the water holding capacity is much higher, and they're able to grow a crop. It could be rice, it could be something else, but at least this is an innovation that came out of the farmers, and I think that they should be empowered, so that their voices should be heard. And I think that we should always try to give the farmers that opportunity. So basically what we're saying is that Africa is making some progress. We're beginning to see progress at the end. We're beginning to see progress at the end of the tunnel. We need to make sure that progress move forward, that green light move forward, so that Africa fall in line with the rest of the world. I am pleased to say that in the last few years, particularly in the 2000 era so far, we've seen renewed economic growth in the continent. Economic growth prior to that was at a level of something like 2-3%. Today it's gone up, at least the average for 2006 is gone up to 5.7%, which is really very good. And I think that one of the reasons for this economic growth is the fact that our political leaders are beginning to tighten their belts. Generally, we get in some form of good governance, and some kind of commitment to change, to innovation from our governments. And we're beginning to see them make commitments, to agriculture, to agricultural research, to information communication systems, etc. So yes, we're beginning to see some improvements. And of course, they've been interested in Africa's development as well. I believe it's because if one lags behind, you tend to draw everyone else behind. And so the international community is beginning to show interest in Africa's development. For example, there is the UN task force that is operating in Africa. There is the former United Nations Chairperson or Secretary General Kofi Annan's initiative on realizing the promise and potential of African agriculture. There is the Tony Blair Commission for Africa that looked at issues related to development and agricultural development in particular. And there is the G8 declaration to end hunger in Africa. So there are lots of international awareness of the need to assist Africa. And I believe that all these initiatives are very important. But we shouldn't make the mistakes of the past 50 years. We need to coordinate these initiatives. The Africans themselves will need to take the leadership, to drive the process, of course, in conjunction with all those that will want to support Africa, that would like to see Africa grow. What about political commitment? I talked of good governance coming on. And I think that at the beginning of the 2000 era, in an effort to drive the development process, our political leaders created a body that they call NEPAD, the New Partnership for Africa's Development. And NEPAD was supposed to lead development in the continent as a whole, to drive economic growth. NEPAD, realizing the importance of agriculture as the engine or the backbone to economic growth, developed a document that they call the CAADP, the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program. And this is a program that spells out the strategies. It outlines the goals and objectives for agricultural development in Africa. And this CAADP recognizes the vision for Africa's development, which call for the continent to attain 6% agricultural production growth rate by the year 2015. 2015 is just 9 years away from today. 6% agricultural production growth rate for a continent which for many decades stood around something like 2 or 3%. It's going to be a daunting task to achieve. And on top of that, what does 6% agricultural production growth rate translate to? It calls for Africa to develop dynamic markets within countries, between sub-regions, and of course between the continent and the international community. It calls for Africa to become a net exporter of agricultural products. And it calls for equitable distribution of wealth so that there will be food availability, food affordability. Either you produce what you eat or you have the funds to buy and eat the kind of food that you want to eat. And then it calls for Africa to play a strategic role in science and technology and in conservation of the global environment. And of course, it calls for Africa to conserve and judiciously utilize its own natural resources, which of course is very, very rich, natural resources. So these are objectives that must be achieved in 2015, and that will enable Africa, of course, to some extent to achieve some of the Millennium Development Goal. And to achieve this, NEPAD decided that we could do that through 4 pillars. I've not listed the pillar down here, but Pillar 1 relates to land and water management. Pillar 2 to infrastructural development and market access. Pillar 3 relates to food security and poverty alleviation. And Pillar 4 relates to agricultural research, technology dissemination, and adoption. And Pillar 4 is my concern because I work for the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa, and we coordinate and facilitate agricultural research, and we were called and signed an agreement with the African Union, with NEPAD, to coordinate implementation of CAADP Pillar 4, which relates to agricultural research, technology dissemination, and adoption. And of course, Pillar 4 wants to look at 4 major themes: integrated natural resource management, adaptive management of germplasm, development of functional markets, and development of appropriate policies that will create the conducive atmosphere for us to work. So in an effort to address those 4 pillars, those 4 themes of Pillar 4, we rallied the research development community, in fact, all entities involved in agricultural research and development in Africa, the researchers, extension, NGO group, farmers organization, farmers themselves, policymakers, the private sector. We all came together to develop, spearheaded by FARA, we developed a document that we call FAP, the Framework for African Agricultural Productivity. And this is a document that actually provides guidance for the development of productivity programs at national level, at sub-regional level, and at continental level. And the aim is for all of us to address those pillars that are outlined in CAADP Pillar 4, which is research, technology, dissemination, and adoption. And so you could see that basically what we've done is to come up with a common agenda for agricultural research and development in the continent as a whole, an agenda that will be addressed across board, at continental level by institutions like FARA, sub-regional level by sub-regional organizations, and at national level by national programs. And I am pleased to say that a number of national governments have come up with their own productivity program, long-term agricultural development program, and regional institutions like ECOWAS, regional economic bodies are coming up with their own multi-country agricultural productivity program, which these are programs that cut across countries or add values to cross-country collaboration. And the framework also gives the processes that will steer institutions and their programs to realize the CAADP vision of obtaining 6% agricultural production growth rate by the year 2015. It is a strong political advocacy document that calls for political support, institutional support, and, of course, financial support. So at the political level, and at that level, we've made considerable progress. And but there are still some concerns that we have looked into, and we believe that we should take into consideration in Africa if we're going to achieve sustainable development, sustainable agricultural development. And I should say that these concerns are listed there, that we need to develop innovation systems approach to technology generation, dissemination, and adoption. And the reason for this is because in the past 50 years, we spent time following what we call the linear approach, in which research developed the technology, they pass the technology on to extension, extension is supposed to pass that technology on to farmers. It hasn't worked because extension is very weak. They do not even contact the farmers. You know, and we feel that it's time that we should bring everybody along the value chain from research right through to consumption. Everybody's, you know, participate in the development of the protocol, in the implementation of the protocol, so that at the end of the day, the farmers will say, we are part of it, so we endorse the technology. At the end of the day, the private sector will say, we are there, so we take the fertilizers to the farm gate and take the extra product to the market. You must align production to the market for you to be able to achieve increased production, and of course to build the well-being of the people that you're working for. If the farmers does not earn money, we're not improving their livelihoods, and I think we should. We have to carry out institutional and human capacity building, and we have to make sure that we ensure access to information and knowledge, and of course to the dissemination of appropriate technologies. In terms of promoting innovation systems approach, I think I've described that, but there are a number of research areas, domains that are very important. Intensifying subsistence-oriented smallholder farming system. I'm not going to read all of them, but those are some of the areas of key importance. And we think that These components, 4 components, are really very important individually, as components, as issues. But the interaction amongst these are also very important. You know, and the innovation system approach that we are preaching, and now we've called for all institutions to develop this approach in Africa, and we're beginning to see a number of institutions coming together, you know, because we feel that this is an approach that will allow for action learning. As you move, there's continuous learning, you know, and it's built on the principles of participatory approaches. It's built on the principles of programmatic integration, which we think is very important. In terms of building institutional capacity and, of course, human capacity as well, we need to build the capacity of our institutions, our national programs in particular, in the area of governance and research governance and management, in the area of research funding and financial management, which is very important, in strengthening their scientific capacity and in strengthening their capacity to collaborate, you know, and we need to see how we can reform our institutions, you know, so that you do what you can do best, somebody else does what he can do best, and at the end of the day, you put all your results together for the benefit of everybody. And with regards to facilitation of information, knowledge, and technologies, we have to ensure access to information, not only at the researcher level, the scientist level, extension workers level, but also at the farmer level. The farmer needs to get that information to know from his village that the going price in the city is that much, so that the middlemen or the middle person or people that goes to purchase from them do not dupe those farmers. We see quite a lot of these things happening in Africa. We need to improve availability of decision-making tools and accelerate intra-regional spread of innovations. I have mentioned a number of improved technologies, credible technologies that are out there that we need to disseminate within the region. So these are just some thoughts that I thought that I should pass on to you, but I think that I would like to conclude by saying that we are making some kind of progress in Africa. Research output is becoming more and more recognized. Agricultural research is becoming more responsive to the markets. We're linking production to markets to improve the well-being of our farmers. Who says that the subsistence farmer should not produce extra for sale so that she can earn money? And there's great recognition of the role of research and development by our political leaders, and great awareness of HIV/AIDS and other problems, and the need to develop appropriate technologies that will allow these people to function. Need for us to consider the gender issues. There are lots of female farmers out there, and they need to be empowered. They need to sit at all levels, including management levels. They need to participate effectively across the board. And I believe that basically what we're doing is create the conducive atmosphere for Africa to develop its agricultural production, improve its agricultural productivity, fall in line with the rest of the world, you know, so that we promote the development issues, because we feel that if Africa lags behind, then Africa will be draining the other continents of their resources that they will use to develop Africa. But if Africa fall in line, then Africa will work with the rest of the world, I believe, to make this planet of ours a better place for us today, for our children, and for our children's children tomorrow. Thank you very much. Yes, please. Yeah. I'd be glad to.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And Dr. Jones has indicated he would be willing to take questions from the audience. There's a microphone here in the middle, and if I could ask folks to line up behind the microphone. And you might start by telling us who you are.
Hello. Okay, it's on. Hi there. My name is Luke Grant. I'm a senior in forestry at Whoa. Okay, I won't touch it. I'm a senior in forestry at Iowa State University, and thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed the lecture. I have two questions regarding biofuels and climate change, both of which were not mentioned in this lecture. Specifically about biofuels and combined with the focus of export-led agricultural growth. Do you foresee Africa as becoming a leader in, for example, palm oil as a biofuel to supply Europe? And if so, what is the impact that could have on the subsistence farmers or food security for people in Africa? And my second question is about climate change. Seeing how sub-Saharan Africa is, the predictions are not too good regarding climate change in sub-Saharan Africa. What do you foresee as kind of the leadership steps we should be taking now in order to stave off any sort of collapse or more drastic problems related to food production in sub-Saharan Africa?
I go ahead. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't get your name, but those are two very important questions, and I think that it relates to two issues that we're trying to see how we can solve in Africa. And I should say that both issues we're trying to see how we can come up with an African strategy, African strategies to address those two issues. With regards to biofuel, I think what I would like to say is that the Green Revolution bypassed Africa in the 60s. And since then, Africa has been saying we must achieve that Green Revolution. We still have not achieved the Green Revolution. So when these developments, these issues that would improve the well-being, the livelihood of the people, whenever they come up, we would like to give support to it. And so in the area of biofuel, my institution, FARA, and a number of other institutions in the continent, including NEPAD itself, are looking at this and then trying to see if we should come up with a strategy, one in which, of course, each country will have to take a decision on where they want to go, whether they want to go for food security or they want to go for energy production, using crops to produce energy, like you mentioned, palm oil. But we personally feel that if this is an area that will bring resources to the farmers, an area that will bring resources to the country, that will solve the problem of energy, help to solve or at least meet energy demand, we feel that Africa should go for it. But we feel that each country should work out a strategy whereby they will not sacrifice food security for energy. I think the only sustainable way that you can keep a country is for that country to be able to produce its own food, rather than to import food. One will say, okay, make the money and use the money to buy food. But I think that is not sustainable, because if there are problems from where you are importing the food, then you also will run into that problem. So our advice at this stage, as we come up with a strategy, is to create a balance within your country or within your sub-region so that you devote certain area to meeting your own food security needs and other areas to meet your energy needs, or at least to grow crops that will provide energy and, of course, earn you some money as well. This is the approach that we think that we would like to take at this point in time. The climate change is an issue that we are all frightened about. We're looking at it, and we know that Africa is going to be severely affected by this. We're beginning to see the effect of this. We're beginning to see excessive drought and excessive flood and locust and some of these other problems. And again, we're trying to come up with a strategy, a global strategy for the continent to address this, to be able to predict when some of these problems will occur and then how to tackle some of these problems. At least these are structures that we are trying to put in place. Meanwhile, I believe all sectors, including researchers and government parties, are quite aware of this problem. Here and there are discussions on this. Of course, we need to coordinate ourselves and make sure that we follow a strategy that is defined for the continent. But I agree with you. If we do not address it, it's going to result to a very serious problem for Africa. And we don't want this to happen at this point in time that we're beginning to see a turnaround, at least in agricultural production, and beginning to see some kind of increased agricultural productivity, from within the continent. I tell you, it is delighting to note that at least 11 countries in Africa has attained, or pretty close to attaining, that 6% level of agricultural production growth rates that our political leaders mandated all countries to achieve in 2015. Climate change might change all of that if we do not address this particular issue. So it is very important for us. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Chad Nelson, and thank you for coming. I was just curious about international investment. I was wondering if you could comment on it. I know that there's a stock market in South Africa, but other than that, I feel like investments in Africa are stemmed right now. So I was wondering if there was any progress that you knew of or could comment on for international investment in Africa.
Okay. I believe in my lecture I did mention a range of initiatives, international initiatives, to support African agriculture and African development. I talked of the Tony Blair initiative, which has made some funds available to support various projects in Africa. So internationally, Africa is getting quite a lot of support. And I will tell you that our demand for agricultural research and extension in the continent is up to very recently in the region of something like 2.53 billion annually, and 45% of that is coming from national governments. Another 45% or so is coming from the international funding agencies, the World Bank, the EC, etc. The investment that is coming from Africa has been, you can see, it's very small because it's our agricultural activities, and 40%, 45% is still small. But recently, our governments made a commitment to increase their investment to 10% of their national budget. 10% of their national budget. And for some countries like South Africa that you mentioned, that could be substantial amount of money. South Africa is one country that is investing a lot. Almost all countries in the last 3 to 4 years have increased their investment in agriculture and agricultural research. Almost all countries in the continent. So we're beginning to see a slow comeback or a slow support to agriculture and agricultural research. And I think that if this momentum continues, then it will get to a point where and especially if we continue to see increased agricultural productivity, where there will be excess funds that government will be able to put into agricultural development as well.
Do you know of any private opportunities for investment or an expansion or progress in the private sector?
There are lots of private opportunities for investment in Africa. Africa is endowed with lots of resources that needs to be tapped. We need to invest in those areas. I'm not going to mention mineral resources are just tremendous, and In the agricultural sector, I think there's, you mentioned palm oil. This is an area that needs to be developed. And we see floriculture, horticulture becoming very important means of trade between Africa and the international community, particularly to European countries, And I mentioned cotton, that is, so there are lots of areas for investment. And I think that this is the good thing, that Africa is got all of these resources. Today, Africa may not be sitting on the banquet table, but tomorrow, Africa could play a major role in that banquet table because of its relevant mineral resources that everybody will want to get hands on. Okay?
My name is Martin Clark. I was in Ethiopia in 2000. I taught a class of young agriculturists, and the first question I got was, how come in America you're increasing the subsidies in farmers in here, telling us to decrease ours? And I worked with a group of young agriculturists that were going to work with agriculture cooperatives. It seemed that they have no forward pricing system.
I'm not, can you, yeah.
They have no forward pricing system for the grain. So the farmers, these small cooperatives, borrowed money to hold the grain for a few months and sell it. And in the meantime, foreign trade came in, free grain, took the place of this, and the farmers are still holding the grain. And how much is the WTO affecting?
How much is what?
WTO trade affecting the
World Trade Organization.
I see. Okay. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I got the question very well. But Africa have not fared on very well in the international trade for many reasons. Because of you have to look at quality, you have to look at standards, and you have to take this into consideration. And you're talking of people that are involved in subsistence farming, so they could not meet that standard, But I think that I mentioned earlier on floriculture, which is become a very important trade, banana and others, and trade banana and others, and trade banana and others.